Dr. Elias Galloway's boots crunched on the frozen soil of Titan, Saturn's largest moon. Under a dense atmosphere of nitrogen and methane, Titan's surface was an eerie, alien landscape. Far beyond Earth's warmth, the distant sun cast a dim, cold light, barely illuminating the rugged terrain and towering cryovolcanoes. Elias adjusted his helmet's visor to dampen the orange haze, his breath steady as he surveyed the environment. As the lead biologist of the Europa Interplanetary Research Coalition, Elias was part of a small team assigned to study Titan's complex, undiscovered ecosystem. They'd been camped here for 6 weeks, collecting samples from methane lakes and strange flora that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. But Elias, driven by both scientific curiosity and a strange pull he couldn't explain, had wandered further than usual today. Something about the energy in the air seemed different. He checked his tracking device, its faint beeps guiding him to a canyon he'd spotted from the research outpost days before. As he rounded a jagged corner, he stopped, frozen in his tracks. There, wedged between 2 rock formations, lay a creature unlike anything in the Titan research logs. It was massive, larger than a bear, with shimmering, translucent skin that refracted the dim light, casting eerie rainbows across the canyon walls. Her form was both terrifying and beautiful, with intricate patterns along her sides that pulsed in rhythm with labored breathing. Elias's heart raced. His visor analyzed the creature's biochemistry in real time, and the results shocked him: high metabolic output, elevated temperature, signs of intense physical distress. This being was in the throes of labor, trying to bring new life into a hostile world. For a moment, he debated returning to the outpost to alert his team. But the sight of her suffering, of her desperate breaths, anchored him to the spot. His hand instinctively went to his emergency medical kit, one designed for unexpected alien interactions, and he moved forward slowly. "Hey there," he whispered, even though he knew she wouldn't understand. He held up his hands, making soothing sounds as he approached. She turned her head, and he saw her eyes large, luminescent, and oddly human in their expression. They locked onto his, full of pain, fear, and a glimmer of intelligence that shook him to his core. "All right," he murmured, "I'm here to help." He approached, maintaining steady eye contact. His hands moved with care, using the kit to administer stabilizing compounds, hoping his interventions would help rather than harm. The creature didn't flinch, but her labored breathing grew softer, as if she understood his intention. After what felt like hours, the moment arrived. Her breathing intensified, and her body heaved, muscles rippling under translucent skin. Elias stayed at her side, his hands gently guiding her movements, providing the small assistance he could. Then, with a final shuddering exhale, she gave birth. 2 small, writhing hatchlings emerged, glistening and otherworldly, their tiny forms wet and trembling in the cold air. Elias helped clear them, his gloved hands handling them gently as he inspected their fragile bodies, amazed at their rapid responsiveness. They were breathtakingly unique, semi-translucent, with spiny appendages and webbed wings folded close to their bodies. And then the strangest thing happened. Both hatchlings, barely minutes old, opened their eyes and fixed their gaze on Elias. Their eyes, a brilliant iridescent green, shimmered with the same intelligence as their mother's. For a second, he felt a deep connection, a wordless understanding that sent a chill down his spine. It was as if they saw through him, understood him in ways he hadn't thought possible. And in their gaze, he sensed a wordless declaration: "We know you." Their mother, exhausted yet seemingly relieved, nudged her hatchlings closer to Elias with surprising gentleness. He realized she was trusting him, leaving her offspring in his care. He knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder. She emitted a low, resonant hum, and for a moment, he thought it was a form of goodbye. As he watched, her breathing slowed, and her eyes lost their sharp glow. She was gone, her life given to bring forth her young in Titan's barren wilderness. Elias remained kneeling, feeling both the weight of her sacrifice and the unexpected responsibility that had settled upon him. He looked down at the 2 hatchlings, who continued to gaze at him with unwavering loyalty. There was no question in their demeanor. They recognized him as their caregiver, their protector, their master. Tired and overwhelmed, Elias finally spoke. "All right then," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper in the Titan wind. "I guess you're with me now." He gathered the hatchlings gently, nestling them into the folds of his thermal coat. They were cool to the touch, but surprisingly calm, nestled close to him as if they had known him forever. As he made his way back to the research base, he felt their breathing match his own, a comforting, synchronized rhythm. By the time he reached the base, he had already begun to feel a connection with them, one that was both profound and inexplicable. Though he had saved them, it felt as though they, in some way, had chosen him. Back at the base on Titan, Dr. Elias Galloway worked swiftly to prepare a habitat for the two alien hatchlings. The base was a small, temporary outpost with limited resources, not designed to accommodate strange alien creatures. Still, Elias managed to convert a storage chamber, lining it with thermal blankets and adding a few makeshift heat sources to simulate the warmth they would need. He monitored the hatchlings constantly, captivated by their rapid growth and alien intelligence. The hatchlings, whom he had named Skara and Lyra, adapted to the habitat quickly, exploring every corner, always keeping him in sight. They were growing at an astonishing rate, reaching the size of small dogs within the first 24 hours. Their forms were mesmerizing, their semi-translucent bodies seemed to pulse with shifting colors, and spiny ridges along their backs shivered in reaction to his every move. Their iridescent eyes studied him as he worked, following his gestures, seemingly understanding his intentions. It didn't take long for Elias to notice something unusual. The hatchlings were more than just dependent on him. They responded to his presence with an uncanny devotion, always returning to him, circling protectively, and positioning themselves between him and anything unfamiliar. He experimented by leaving the room, watching from the observation panel. They would pace restlessly until he returned, their eyes fixed on the door, their bodies tensed. The days passed, and Elias was drawn deeper into this connection, spending hours in their habitat observing them, speaking to them as if they could understand him. And maybe, he began to believe, they really did understand. The more time he spent with them, the more they seemed to mimic his behaviors, watching intently as he cleaned their habitat, prepared food, or worked with his equipment. Elias began to test their responsiveness. He would point at an object, and Skara would trot over to examine it. If he raised his hands, Lyra would extend her spiny wings, unfurling them in a display that he came to recognize as both beautiful and protective. He felt a sense of pride watching them, marveling at how much they seemed to understand him, how quickly they adapted to his gestures and voice. One night, after a particularly long day of analysis and experiments, Elias collapsed on his cot in exhaustion. The hatchlings had grown restless as night fell, but he had assumed it was just their natural energy. He closed his eyes, listening to their soft, resonant chirps from their habitat. Suddenly, a loud alarm jolted him awake. Red lights flashed through the base, illuminating the halls in a warning glow. Elias leaped from his cot, adrenaline surging, and raced to the main control room. His research partner, Dr. Marianne Chen, was frantically typing at the console, her face pale. "What's going on?" Elias demanded, still half-dazed. "Multiple systems are failing across the base," she replied, her voice tight with fear. "Power fluctuations, unexplained pressure drops. I think something's interfering with our core systems." Elias's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Then, a sinking realization hit him: Titan's ecosystem might hold more dangers than they'd previously detected. His team had only scratched the surface of Titan's alien flora and fauna. The possibility of a hostile species lurking in the shadows was all too real. The hatchlings sensed his distress before he even reached their habitat. Skara and Lyra were already at the door, alert, eyes wide and bodies tensed, their spines raised. Elias opened the door, and they circled him, chirping in low, rumbling tones. He had never seen them so agitated. Elias kneeled down and placed a hand on each of their backs, feeling the strange warmth of their skin. "It's all right, you too," he murmured, hoping to calm them. But as he did, they pressed closer to him, almost shielding him from the doorway. It was as if they knew something he didn't. Moments later, a deep, echoing sound reverberated through the walls, a low growl that sent a chill down Elias's spine. This was no mere malfunction, it was something alive. He looked down at Skara and Lyra, his heart pounding. Their eyes locked onto his, their pupils narrowing in unison, signaling a shared understanding. Whatever was out there, they were ready to face it with him. Grabbing his thermal coat and flashlight, Elias set out with Skara and Lyra trailing close behind, their forms low and predatory. As they walked, the base's lights flickered, and every shadow seemed to stretch and warp. The haunting growl echoed again, closer this time. Elias felt Skara press against his leg protectively, her wings partially extended as if ready to shield him. They navigated the narrow halls, following the sound down into the deeper maintenance corridors of the base. With every step, Elias felt a strange sensation, a calm resolve that came from his connection with the hatchlings. They were no longer just alien creatures under his care, they had become his protectors, perhaps even his allies. In the dim glow of the emergency lights, Elias finally saw the source of the disturbances. It was a creature, larger than any he had ever seen on Titan. Its body was an armored mass, segmented and sleek, with elongated limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes glowed with an eerie red light, focused entirely on Elias. It emitted a guttural hiss, the sound vibrating through the walls. Before Elias could react, Skara and Lyra lunged forward, their wings flared and spines bristling. They moved as a unit, striking with a force that belied their small size. Skara leapt at the creature's legs, tearing into it with razor-sharp claws, while Lyra's wings buffeted it, driving it backward. The creature fought back, its massive claws swiping at the hatchlings, but they were agile, dodging with coordinated movements. Elias watched in awe as they maneuvered with perfect synchronization, defending him with a fierce loyalty he hadn't thought possible. The creature let out a final, pained roar, retreating into the shadows, vanishing back into the depths of the base's subterranean tunnels. Skara and Lyra returned to Elias's side, their bodies heaving from exertion but eyes still alert, scanning the area for any lingering threat. Elias knelt beside them, running his hands along their spiny backs, whispering his thanks. They chirped softly, leaning into his touch, their eyes never leaving his face. In that moment, he understood that his bond with them was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He wasn't just their rescuer or caretaker, he was their master, their guide, and they would follow him anywhere. Word of the encounter spread through the base, and Elias's colleagues regarded him and his hatchlings with a mix of awe and fear. Some warned him of the dangers of keeping alien creatures so close, but he knew that Skara and Lyra were different. They had chosen him, protected him, and formed an unbreakable bond that went beyond anything he could have imagined. In the nights that followed, Elias would often sit with Skara and Lyra, feeling their warmth and strength by his side. He knew now that he was never truly alone. In the silent depths of Titan, amid the flickering lights of the base, they were a Pack-A family. And whatever awaited them in the alien wilderness, they would face it together. The days following the strange creature's attack were filled with tension. Elias's colleagues grew increasingly wary of the unknown dangers lurking in Titan's wilderness. The base was on high alert, and while repairs were underway, strange occurrences began to unfold. Tools vanished, shadowy figures seemed to flicker in the dim lighting, and a faint but eerie hum echoed through the corridors at night. Some members of the research team whispered about ancient creatures, guardians of Titan that had laid dormant for centuries, disturbed by their presence. But for Elias, it was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that Skara and Lyra sensed something even deeper. One evening, as he returned from a maintenance shift, Dr. Marianne Chen, his research partner and the base's head engineer, pulled him aside. "We've lost 4 people in the last 2 days, Elias." "4," she hissed, her face pale with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. They were in corridors one moment, and then gone. and no one seen what took them. Elias felt a chill settle over him. His eyes instinctively darted toward his quarters, where he had left Skara and Lyra resting. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice low, "I've got a theory. I think whatever took our people, it's somehow connected to the creatures we found out here. But Skara and Lyra aren't like them. They fought that thing off. They saved me. I think they can help us." Marianne glanced at him, worry shadowing her face. "You are putting a lot of trust in two alien creatures, Elias. I know it sounds insane, but there's something special about them. They're aware. They recognize the danger. If anyone can help us, it's them." Marianne hesitated but eventually nodded. "All right, Elias. If you really believe they can help, then we'll need every ally we can get. But be careful. The others are on edge. They're starting to see Skara and Lyra as part of the problem." Elias returned to his quarters, determined to prepare for whatever lay ahead. As he entered, he was greeted by Skara and Lyra, who sat attentively, their eyes locked onto him with an intensity that was almost human. He crouched down, placing a hand on each of their backs. "We're in trouble," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "There's something out there that's after us. I need you two to help me." The hatchlings responded immediately, nuzzling him with surprising gentleness, their eyes unwavering. Elias felt an unspoken promise between them. They understood. The following night, the base was plunged into chaos. Elias was jolted awake by the blaring alarm, red emergency lights casting frantic shadows on the walls. He stumbled out of his bunk, grabbing his flashlight and radio. The noise was deafening, accompanied by a rumbling that seemed to come from deep beneath the base. He knew instantly, this was not a drill. He dashed to the control room, Skara and Lyra on his heels, their bodies tense and alert. Marianne was there, frantically typing on the console, her face illuminated by the harsh red light. "They're everywhere, Elias," she shouted over the noise. "The creatures, whatever they are, they're breaking into the base. They're coming from the tunnels we used to dig out the outpost." Elias watched as a map of the base appeared on the screen, red dots flashing as more sectors fell under siege. The creatures were moving with terrifying speed, breaching corridor after corridor, coming closer to the central hub. "We need to evaluate," another scientist shouted, terror etched on his face. "If we stay here, we're done for." Panic spread through the crew, but Elias's mind was already racing. He glanced down at Skara and Lyra, who stood by his side, their eyes never leaving him. The connection between them was palpable. They were ready to fight, to protect him, even if it meant risking their lives. "Wait!" Elias called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "I have a plan." The team turned to him, desperation cleared in their eyes. "These creatures, they don't like fire or bright lights. We saw that the first time they attacked. We need to lure them into the lower maintenance corridors where we can control the lighting. If we can concentrate them in one area, we might be able to seal them off." Marianne nodded, catching on to his plan. "I can reroute power to the lower corridors, but it'll only give us a few minutes before the circuits overload. After that, we'll lose the lighting entirely." "Then that's our window," Elias said. "I'll take Skara and Lyra. We'll lure them down there, and when the lights are at full intensity, we'll trap them in the corridor." The plan was risky, borderline suicidal, but there was no other choice. As the team dispersed to prepare, Elias knelt beside Skara and Lyra, running a hand along their spiny backs. "This might be dangerous," he murmured, "but I know you can do it. We just have to hold them off long enough." The hatchlings nuzzled him, their eyes gleaming with determination. He couldn't shake the feeling that they understood him more than he realized. Minutes later, Elias and his two alien companions moved swiftly through the empty corridors, the blaring alarms echoing around them. Skara and Lyra moved with a newfound intensity, scanning every corner, every shadow. Their wings extended, casting long, eerie shapes against the red-lit walls. As they descended into the lower corridors, the air grew colder, and the distant growling of the creatures grew louder. The hatchlings stiffened, eyes glowing as they sensed the impending threat. Elias's heart pounded as the creatures appeared, one by one, slithering and crawling from the darkness. Their elongated bodies and segmented armor glistened in the dim light, their claws scraping against the metal floors. The creature's eyes glowed red, fixed on Elias with a chilling intelligence. He fought down his fear, raising his flashlight and shouting to draw their attention. Skara and Lyra moved in front of him, forming a protective barrier. With a fierce chirp, Lyra spread her wings wide, her spine shimmering in the dim light. Skara snarled, her claws digging into the floor as she prepared to defend Elias. The creatures lunged, but Skara and Lyra reacted instantly. They darted forward, striking with practiced coordination. Skara tore into the closest creature's limb, while Lyra buffeted another with her wings, driving it back. Their movements were fluid, almost graceful, as they defended him against the oncoming threat. But there were too many. The creatures closed in, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. Just as Elias began to fear they wouldn't hold out, a blinding light flooded the corridor. Marianne had rerouted the power. The creatures recoiled, hissing in agony as the intense light seared their eyes. Elias seized the moment, shouting to Skara and Lyra to retreat. They fell back with him, moving quickly as he led them toward the exit. Behind them, the creatures thrashed and screeched, desperate to escape the light's intensity. Marianne's voice crackled over the radio. "Elias! Now!" He reached the control panel by the exit and slammed his hand onto the lever, activating the reinforced doors. With a hiss of pressurized air, the doors slid shut, sealing the creatures inside. Silence settled over the corridor. Elias slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. Skara and Lyra pressed close to him, their breathing heavy but eyes bright, filled with the fierce loyalty that had saved him yet again. Marianne and the rest of the crew soon arrived, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief. One by one, they approached Skara and Lyra, some offering quiet words of thanks, others simply gazing in awe. As the adrenaline faded, Elias looked down at his two alien companions. They had proven themselves time and time again, and now, the entire crew saw them not as monsters, but as allies. In the days that followed, the research team worked tirelessly to secure the base and stabilize its systems. They didn't know if more creatures would return, but they had gained a new sense of resilience. And for Elias, Skara, and Lyra, an unspoken bond had solidified. They were more than allies, they were family, united by a loyalty that transcended worlds. And somewhere, in the shadow depths of Titan, other eyes watched from the darkness, waiting for their chance to strike. The days following the attack had a strange, heavy calm. Repairs to the base were nearly complete, and the remaining crew members operated with a renewed purpose, understanding that Titan's dangers went far beyond what they had anticipated. Despite their enhanced security, everyone knew they were only guests on this alien moon, subject to forces far older and more powerful than themselves. Elias and his two hatchlings, Skara and Lyra, had become a focal point of both admiration and trepidation among the crew. Some still looked upon them with unease, but most had come to respect them as guardians, recognizing their vital role in protecting the base. Word spread quickly of how Skara and Lyra had fought alongside Elias, risking their lives to fend off the alien creatures. For many, they were no longer just strange monsters, they were allies. Yet, as much as Elias loved and cherished Skara and Lyra, he couldn't ignore the troubling signs that had begun to appear. They had grown larger, now the size of full-grown wolves, with armored scales that gleamed in Titan's dim light. Their behavior had shifted too. They seemed restless, pacing along the base's perimeter, often gazing longingly toward the open wilderness. He'd catch them occasionally looking at him with a strange mixture of love and sorrow, as if they knew something he didn't. One evening, Elias sat with Skara and Lyra near the edge of the base, beneath the strange, orange-tinged sky. The stars sparkled faintly above them, distant and cold, a reminder of how far they all were from the comforts of Earth. Elias stroked Scara's spiny back, feeling a quiet sadness settle over him. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. "The call of this place. I don't belong here. But you. You do." Lyra looked up at him, her iridescent eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond words. She chirped softly, a sound that was almost mournful, as if confirming his thoughts. Scara leaned into his touch, but her gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Elias's thoughts were interrupted by a crackle over the comm system. Marianne's voice came through, soft but tense. "Elias, you'd better come to the control room. We're getting signals from the upper atmosphere, shifts in pressure and movement that we can't explain. I think something's coming." Elias's heart tightened. He turned to Scara and Lyra, who had both risen to their feet, alert, their eyes scanning the sky. Without hesitation, they followed him back to the base, moving swiftly down the dimly lit corridors toward the control room. Inside, Marianne and the remaining crew were monitoring a large screen showing the atmospheric data. Patterns of pressure and magnetic fields fluctuated wildly, forming an erratic but unmistakable disturbance high above the moon's surface. "What are we looking at?" Elias asked, watching the reading spike and dip with unsettling regularity. Marianne shook her head. "It's hard to say, but it's bigger than anything we've encountered here. And it's heading our way." A cold dread settled over the room. The team had no way of knowing if this disturbance was natural or some sort of retaliation from Titan's ecosystem. They could only prepare for the worst. As they huddled in tense silence, the base's power flickered, and the comm system crackled with strange static. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls and floors. Elias recognized it at once. It was the same hum he'd heard that night when the creatures attacked. But this time, it was louder, deeper, as if the very ground of Titan was responding. Suddenly, Scara and Lyra moved to the center of the control room, standing side by side, their wings unfurled. Their eyes glowed with a fierce, unearthly light, and they began emitting a low, harmonic sound, almost like a chant. The crew watched in awe, and Elias felt a chill. Scara and Lyra weren't afraid. They seemed ready, as though they had been waiting for this moment. "What are they doing?" Marianne whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Elias felt a strange certainty settle over him. "I think they're answering the call. Titan is their world, not ours. They've been preparing for this from the start." The base shuddered as the hum intensified, and a deep voice, more feeling than sound, seemed to resonate from the very walls, from the soil and rock of Titan itself. Elias couldn't understand it, but he felt its meaning, a summons, a calling for Scara and Lyra to return to the wild, to take their place as part of this moon's ancient rhythm. Scara turned to Elias, her iridescent eyes locking onto his. She chirped softly, a sound that resonated with love, gratitude, and a bittersweet farewell. Lyra nuzzled against him, her wings brushing his arm with a gentleness that nearly brought him to tears. Elias knelt, placing a hand on each of their backs. His heart ached, but he knew he couldn't hold them back. "Go," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This is where you belong. You're not meant to be contained here with us. You're part of something much bigger." He felt Scara and Lyra's warmth one last time before they moved to the door, their heads held high, their forms shimmering as if cloaked in Titan's light. The crew members watched in silence as Elias led them outside, through the base's outer doors and into the rugged terrain beyond. They paused, looking back at him one last time, their eyes filled with memories and unspoken promises. And then they turned, spreading their wings and vanishing into the mists, their shapes merging with the shadows of Titan's wilderness. The base grew silent, save for the faint hum that slowly faded as the disturbance in the atmosphere settled. Elias felt a deep emptiness, a hollow ache that went beyond words. Scara and Lyra were gone, but he knew they had found their place, their purpose. In the days that followed, the base was quieter, subdued. The creatures that had plagued them seemed to retreat, as if recognizing the newfound guardianship over the moon's lands. Elias continued his work, studying Titan's mysteries, but he could no longer view the moon as a mere object of study. It was a living world, one with a pulse, a song of its own. Months later, when the time came for the team to depart, Elias felt a profound sense of both loss and peace. As the shuttle ascended, he looked out the window, his eyes scanning Titan's surface, hoping for a glimpse of his companions. And then, as they broke through the orange-tinged atmosphere, he saw them too small, distant shapes gliding over the rugged landscape, moving with purpose and grace. They were watching, their gazes lifted to the sky, as if seeing him off. A soft smile touched Elias's face. Skara and Lyra had found their place on Titan, and he had found a family he would never forget. In their fierce loyalty and strength, they had shown him that some bonds were unbreakable, even across worlds. As the shuttle drifted away from Titan, Elias felt their eyes on him still, guardians of a world they would protect, always watching, always waiting, their souls forever intertwined with his own.